It's back. It's finally back. Anybody that has made a cast on crit build kind of already knew that the increases to mana cost, and on top of that, also making any spell that actually is critted was going to cost a spell, and it wasn't really going to be an issue. That can be easily dropped. The issue really came in keeping the strength and power that a cast on crit build can have while still being able to drop the mana. And mana is only one of the issues. The other being accuracy, keeping your auras, survivability, and, well, damage at the end of the day. One of the days that I was streaming, one of my viewers pointed out a very specific unique from Heist, the Replica Conqueror's Efficiency. Why don't you just use this? It drops the non-channeling skills by 9 total mana cost. And that's a huge amount. And I thought, maybe that would do the trick. So I started working on the actual build itself. I actually tried to transition into cast on crit, but I was already disillusioned because of the fact that most of the gameplay I had with Winter Ore wasn't exactly quite the best. But then I noticed that dropping the cost by 9 and also having -5 total cost in one of the rings and a mana flask was actually allowing me to cast on crit. So I went ahead and started getting the pieces that I needed, fixing my resistances and also grabbing the main ones, which was minus total cost of skills by 5 on both my rings, and I also did it on the amulet. The amulet specifically, not if I made sure that it wasn't giving me accuracy or any other big stat, because I wanted to somehow see if I can actually fit a Pandemonious later down the line. So, you have my jewelry actually giving me, from the 2 rings and the amulet, -15 total cost to all skills. And the Replica Conqueror's Efficiency dropping by an extra 9 pretty much leaves my spells mostly at 0 cost. You got Frostbolt at 0. The Ice Nova's coming from my Cost Breeze, costing 0. My Frostbomb, nothing. And the Ice Nova coming from my 6 Link is actually only 2 mana. So I fixed the mana issue quite well. All I had to sacrifice was 1 jewel socket. But here comes the second issue, which is accuracy. I was actually able to do it with relative ease. I was expecting a lot more cost to this, but it wasn't really all that expensive. My helmet actually has a tier 2 accuracy mod. One of my rings has a tier 2, and the other one has a tier 1. You have my amulet with no accuracy because, as I said before, I want to replicate the idea of actually being able to have a Pandemonious. So all this Jade Amulet is doing is giving me the dexterity and just the cold resistance, ignoring really the life that it has on it. And on my gloves, I have a crafted rank 2 accuracy. Combine that with the actual precision aura. And if you just grab one single precision node, or accuracy node in this case, it pretty much brings my accuracy up to 100%. And even though maybe evasive monsters might be an issue, it's almost negligible. The other way that you can kind of fix accuracy is by going with an Evasion and a Flesh and Stone jewel. If you combine these two, the Evasion, what it does is, when an enemy is blinded, you have a 100% chance to hit them. And Flesh and Stone makes it so that enemies around you are always blinded. So the combination of these gives you a 100% hit chance on all enemies. The problem with this, though, is that you're going to have to give up one of your auras. So, due to the fact that I was able to fix my accuracy quite easily, I wouldn't really recommend this unless you're really, really desperate for a way to fix your accuracy. As for survivability, cast on crit on an assassin as a life build kind of lost one of its best flasks it can use to drop physical damage just enough to get you into the fight and not get one-shotted instantly, which is the Basalt Flask. You could go for armor-based gear, plus a Granite Flask with increased armor during flask effect, but the cost of trying to make these pieces cooperate to give you green and blue sockets would be really annoying. Not only that, but Assassin is already strained on strength. Some of these pieces require a bit too much forcing you to focus some of your gear or nodes on the tree for strength. It is possible to do this, mostly as a band-aid, for the brave flash that we have lost in this precarious battle against the meta shift war. But I personally wouldn't recommend it. It's still possible, so try it. This leaves us with the last issue. Do we have the damage? Yes, but only up to tier 14 maps. I can clear maps just fine, and even with a single damage mod on the map, I never really felt like I was in any danger. Rare monsters drop quite easily, and I was able to clear the expedition content without too many issues other than accidentally grabbing too many damage increasing mods for the mobs. But the real issue is bossing. Even though I can kill the boss, it is quite the CDPS build. Yeah, mind you, this is only and mostly with rare gear build. So what if I actually at least have a Carcass Jack, a Pandemonious Amulet? Well, that would fix the damage by quite a bit. Unfortunately, this would mean the amulet that had the -5 to total mana cost of skills kind of gets dropped. So that would mean that we have to be replacing this with something else. The most obvious choices in Watcher's Eye with the mod non-channeling skills have -5 to -10 to total mana cost while affected by clarity. You would just equip a level 1 clarity to have this come to effect and you are set. There's even little things that I actually kind of forgot as well. This is actually from another Cast on Crit build that I played a while back, a few leagues ago, which I have a Militant Faith Timeless Jewel that can actually equip here into this jewel slot. And I can actually get Inner Conviction, which gives me more spell damage per power charge. So you can actually go ahead and grab this as well, just to boost up your power even furthermore, on top of already the suggestions that I gave, making it quite the competent build at this point now if you actually grab all of this. So let's get to the guide of the build. You will want to actually go into Trickery as your first node, as your first major node. So you would go through the elemental damage nodes, go into Trickery, and afterwards just grab Elemental Focus, go into Cold-Hearted Calculations, pretty straightforward tree for elemental builds on Shadow. But you will want to actually go ahead and grab No Witnesses. Before we didn't really grab this, now we kind of need it due to the nerf that Quartz Flask actually got recently. The problem being that 4% is kind of needed, and No Witnesses in general is a good node to grab because of the increased effect of elusive. Because the increased effect to elusive that is gained from these three nodes is 45% plus the 50% that you gain from Mistwalker is a total 95% increased effect. And when elusive is active, you have a 50% chance to dodge spells and attack hits. What this means is that when you have it at 95% increased effect, it goes all the way up to 29% at the start of elusive, declining steadily down, but still making it a really good choice in order to actually cap out your dodge chance, because that's the intention of these nodes. We want to go over here to the left, grab all these life nodes, and then afterwards just grab these crit multi and crit chance for spell nodes. Great damage nodes that you can actually grab there. You got this assassination node as well that you can grab for crit multi. Once you grab all this, we're not going to go to the left just yet. We're actually wanting to, again, cap out our dodge. So we would go through the life nodes on Blood Drinker and go all the way down into acrobatics and face acrobatics. And this essentially will cap out our dodge chance up to 75% for attack hits, and it also will increase our phase acrobatics all the way up to 66% if I'm not mistaken. You would go ahead and grab all these crit chance and crit multi nodes that you can grab right there, and also finally you would go into herbalism as your life node that is nearby that you can grab efficiently anyway. Afterwards, we would head on over here to the left and grab all these crit multi nodes, the best crit multi wheel that we can grab on the tree personally, that I can think of. And then afterwards, just go ahead and grab these 3 nodes into Snowforge. Snowforge is just such a great node. It gives you cold damage, fire and cold resistance, and crit chances. It's just, you can't go wrong with that. It's such a great node. All right, let's go down to the left over here into the Heart and Soul. Head on over to the left, grab the Arcanist Dominion, and go through the Witch side all the way up here to the left into our Power Charge nodes. And these are increasing our crit multiplier, our crit chance, mana regeneration, which is an okay node. But on top of that, the main use for this is the increased damage per power charge. It is really, really good. The reason why we don't actually go through the middle here is because this is a lot more efficient. And all you need to grab from here, honestly, is this and also the jewel socket. And you don't actually want to grab these. These are quite unnecessary, honestly. They're not necessary at all whatsoever. You do get a little bit of crit multi here, but there are better options for crit multi. It's only 15%. A basic jewel socket would be a lot more formidable than this node, honestly. Then afterwards, just head on over here to the left and finish off by grabbing Arcane Potency for most of your crit multi and crit chance nodes. And afterwards, just go ahead and start grabbing the actual power charge nodes. I actually even forgot one over here, which is this one right here for Infused. That would put you at 7 power charges once you grab your Ascendancies. Grab these life nodes as well for a little bit of Chaos Res. As for the actual jewel sockets, you can just go ahead and grab this one right here for the starter ones. You can actually also grab this life node. This is actually a really good one just because of the fact that it gives you strength and also life gain on kill, which is solid sustain. And for the last nodes that you can go ahead and grab are all the way over here. This is one of the better wheels in the game to grab. It gives you spell damage, increased crit chance, life, and resistances, and everything that you would want from the tree. It is just perfect. Oh, wait, there we go. It is just a perfect set for most spell builds. It's just nice. It's a nice little place. And you would want to go ahead and grab the precision for the accuracy node that you actually are going to need. And at this point, the tree is at level 91, which is perfect. 91 is not really a horrible level to try to attain. It's actually quite comfortable. Level 90 is where level 90 to 95 is where the game starts to get a little bit slower on the XP, but 91 is still reasonable. And you have a few basic jewel sockets as well available that you can actually use. And the last levels would be just dedicated for more jewel sockets and a watcher's eye at the end of the day, right? Because you need jewel sockets for that. And the last 2 nodes, I would actually personally grab these life nodes for the Chaos Res. And the last 3 are just up to you. You can go ahead and increase your maximum life by going for this and for this. And then afterwards, just use the last one on something else. I can't even come up with the last one, honestly. I don't know. There must be something out there. But I really cannot come up with something. I mean, you got this as well. This is not a bad choice. You got a little bit of dex, a little bit of intelligence, a little bit of cast speed. You can go ahead and grab that if you want it. But personally, I wouldn't actually go for that. I would personally instead go for the last jewel socket that you can grab over here on the left. And this is actually a really great node, honestly. This is a really great node. This can do a lot for you. You can actually put a thread of hope here and grab either these nodes or grab these nodes without having to actually grab this. So you can actually make use of this on top of it all. And potentially also be able to grab, I think you can actually catch this while catching as well. I haven't played with the thread of hope in a while, but you can actually go ahead for this tree. And this would be your level 100 tree. Your level 91, as I mentioned before, would be more like this. What else did I grab? Oh, the jewel sockets. The jewel socket is what I grabbed. It would be this, removing this and this. And now all of a sudden, that's a 93 tree. This is a 91. You know? So this is reasonable. You might have to actually grab a dex node, by the way. Dex is very necessary on this build, so this is more like a 92 tree. So you would be grabbing a lot of the... You would grab this Dex note until you can actually fix it with your gear. And then here, the Militant Phase, what would be pushed here, and then you would just grab this, and then you're left with 7 levels, and this would look more like your level 93 tree. So yeah, and then this would be pretty much the tree itself that you would actually be going for. As for the Ascendancies, I personally go always for Unstable Infusion first. I mean, this is literally the node that makes Assassin in general. For the price of not much effort other than doing normal lev, you gain the ability to get power charges when you get, and also when you don't get, a critical strike chance. Also, the extra power charge doesn't really hurt, honestly. For my cruel lev, I go for Deadly Infusion. I am a fun core gamer, I don't play hardcore, so I don't require too much survivability at level 40 to 50. By this point, I would have gotten an extra power charge, allowing me to roll around on 5 power charges, making Deadly Infusion a decent chunk of power through increased critical strike chance and multiplier per power charge. By the time you decide to grab your Merciless Lab Ascendancy, you're probably getting ready for maps. Maps nowadays ain't a pretty sight, so I recommend just going for Capped Out Dodge with the increased effect of Elusive from Mistwalker, and of course the comfort of getting Elusive on critical strike chance. For the Uber Lab, as I said before, I play on Fun Core, so I want the damage, and Cooling Strike is really, really nice. I mean, I just personally hate having a boss or a monster at 1 to 10% HP, and they end up having a shot at taking me out. So Ambush and Assassinate feels like a perfect fit for a damage-inducive assassin. Now for Bandits, you really can't go wrong with the Lyra on this one. I mean, plus 5 to mana regenerated per second, plus 20% to global critical strike multiplier, and plus 15 to elemental resistances. It's pretty good. Main reason why I go for this though is the mana regeneration this time around. Before, it was a nice thing to have. Now it is the main reason you grab this bandit. 2 extra levels from killing all bandits just feels like it ain't gonna cut it for cast on crit assassin this time around in these mana deprived days. Now comes the gear. I already covered a few pieces here and there, but I'm actually going to go into detail for this one. The gear has a 2-step layer. The first layer is mostly changing and switching into a cast on crit from whatever your starter you have chosen to play. The second layer is when you start picking up all the uniques that make the build a little bit more formidable and powerful. Becoming a cast on crit Ice Nova build is simple, since all you really need to start is 2 Cospers and a 6 link to fit in your gems. The hard part is getting the actual rest of the rare gear you want. On your rare gear, you want to focus on accuracy, life, resistance, and non-channeling skills, having a -5 to 7 total mana cost. The accuracy would be on your rings, your helmet, and crafted also on your gloves. You are looking for gear that has a hefty amount of accuracy, so tiers 2 to 1 is the way to go on this one. The resistances were not really a pain. I ran around with a pair of boots that do not have resistances at all, which means you have a lot of space to work with for resistances. You won't be struggling too much to cap them out at 75%. Life is self-explanatory. Just make sure your rare gear has up to tier 2 or 2 if you have to for maximum life. Minus total mana cost to non-channeling skills is gotten by unveiling Elrion jewelry. Most of your mapping will probably be spent trying to get these missions, as in June missions, and running them to start unveiling the stuff. As long as you can maybe get -5 to total mana cost of non-channeling skills, which is rank 2 out of 3, then you're pretty much set. And then there is the Replica Conqueror's efficiency. This piece can drop your mana cost, as we have discussed, down to -9, which is really nice. The cost of this thing is roughly about 25C at the moment. If this item gets picked up a lot more in the future for cast on crit builds or any other build that requires this, I'm expecting this to jump up to at least 60 to 80C, if not more, honestly. Now this is where the rare gear starts getting a little bit more expensive, mostly because of one piece in particular, which is either a pair of gloves that are synthesized with a curse enemies with frostbite on hit with 32% increased effect, or a redeemer base ring with the same curse. These gloves costed me roughly about 50C for a low eye level pair that I happened to find randomly. I feel like I got lucky since just taking a look at the prices of these gloves at the moment is about 4 to 7 exalts. The rings as well ain't so cheap, especially if you want it with life and accuracy. So the price of these rings might actually jump up to 1 to 2 exalts. And this might end up being your first major item to get. I still recommend gunning for this since it's too comfortable to pass up just cursing everything without having to self-cast. If possible, try your best to grab a pair of gloves on the cheap side, since eventually you will be switching out one of the rings for an Elder Ring. If you decide to grab a Frostbite Curse Ring, then make sure that the accuracy on this ring is at least tier 2. I don't recommend going for lower tiers on this, since trying to fix your accuracy is such a hassle. As I mentioned before, this is a 2-layer upgrade, and now comes the actual upgrade that you end up making with uniques that you can pick up. This is a lengthy list, so I guess next for this one, honestly. Some of this I already mentioned, which is a Carcass Jack, a Pandemonius, a Mark of the Shaper, an Elder Ring to pair up with your Mark of the Shaper, a Watcher's Eye, but I didn't mention the last thing that you're probably going to end up doing, which is cooldown recovery rate gear. I'll get to this later. With all of this gear swapping from rares into uniques you end up doing, you're required to get a Watcher's Eye with the mod non-channeling skills have minus 10 to total mana cost while affected by clarity. I want to emphasize the minus 10 here. It is a little pricey at a minimum of 2 exalts 3 weeks into the league, but it's a necessary upgrade. In fact, I would not even consider switching into all of this unique gear unless you can get your hands on one of these. Mana is a huge problem nowadays, so this is a must. Since in Expedition a good 6-link Carcass Jack was hovering around 6 exalts, I just went ahead and bought a good Carcass Jack that wasn't linked. I went ahead and used a Fated Connections prophecy. Trying to get this item as a 6-link is honestly up to you. Find the cheapest method you can go with it. If fusings are a 1,000,000 to 1 chaos, take the fusing route. If Fated Connections are cheap and people ain't trying to scam you with a Jeweler's Touch, go for that. If straight up a 6-link Carcass Jack is cheaper, just get that. It's entirely up to you on that one. The Pandemonius is usually always from 3 to 4 exalts in the first month of the leagues. Kinda rare if it's cheaper, but grab it if you can go for cheaper. I didn't get to talk about the Mark of the Shaper beforehand too much. The idea of this ring is that it increases your spell damage by 60 to 80% if your other ring is an Elder item, and it gives you an added flat lightning damage to spells as well. This is an Opal base ring, so its implicit gives you 15 to 25% increased elemental damage. Combine this ring with 20 Turbulent Catalysts and you have an increase to your damage of 100% plus. It also has an increased maximum life of 6 to 10%. It's a solid choice for a ring. You can easily get one for 15 to 40C about 3 weeks into the league, so depending on how good you want this ring to be, it will be a little bit more expensive, potentially. On your Elder Ring, you want it to cover accuracy, life, and maybe resistances. Make sure that it has an open prefix since you want to craft minus total mana cost of non-channeling skills on this thing. This ring ended up costing me about 50C, but keep in mind, these rings go up to 2x in price fast. Outside of this, a Militant Faith Timeless Jewel requires to have the High Templar Dominus name on it on the first line. This is what makes the Pain Attunement Keystone in this case become the Inner Conviction Keystone, giving you 3% more spell damage per power charge. These are hovering for 50C roughly, so I would only take this as a min-max piece later down the line when you have more levels to work with. Now comes the early min-maxing you end up making with this build, which is Cooldown Recovery Rate Gear, or formerly known as Cooldown Reduction. This will come in 3 different upgrades. You're looking for a combination of any of these items up to a total of 14% cooldown recovery rate to start off with, and yes, this is additive. I will talk a bit more about cooldown recovery rate once I'm done talking about the gear, since it's a little bit of a complicated topic. The first and most obvious of these 3 cooldown reduction upgrades, or CDR for short, is an Awakened Cast on Critical Support gem. The main stat we want from this is the cooldown reduction it gives. This gem starts at 10% CDR, and takes a while to level up, so a piece of gear with cooldown reduction will be necessary. The price range for these is not cheap at all. Even a month into the Expedition League, the prices begin at 4 exalts. Yeah, definitely a piece you leave for last. The second piece would be crafted cooldown reduction on your belt. it is a suffix, so a resistance will have to be sacrificed for this. I would wait for rank 2 since it can go up to 12%, but starts at 9%. Every percent counts with this stuff. This craft only costs about 1 divine orb, so hopefully you get lucky on a few tries in order to actually get, 11 or 12%. The belt can't be anything you want it to be. A leather belt or a Stygian vise is fine. This mostly depends on how deep your pockets go. The third piece will be a pair of Crusader or Shaper boots with cooldown reduction. Tier 2 starts at 6 to 10% and Tier 1 ends up with 11 to 15%. I just want to show a bit of how to search for this item since it will not be cheap at all with the best stats possible, which is 30% movement speed, Tier 3 to 1 maximum life, and Tier 1 increased cooldown recovery rate. Play around with the values a bit, trying to find a cheap piece. Skimping on either life or movement speed will probably be a necessity here. 5% movement speed here, maybe Tier 2 life there, should be enough. You may even end up with a piece that doesn't even have resistances at all. Okay. Well, I wasn't expecting this to be so lengthy, but a lot had to be covered here in terms of gear since there are a ton of currency leaps you have to do to make this build worthwhile. But here comes this talk. It is like the beast and bird talk, but for cast on crit builds, which is cooldown recovery rate talk. So sit down, son. This is going to be a long one. Cooldown recovery rate, what ends up doing is inherently increasing the times a spell can be casted, which happens to have a cooldown. Pretty straightforward, right? What ends up happening is that every time you attack and crit, you throw a spell. On this hit, your spell begins an internal cooldown. If the next attack comes prematurely before the cooldown has to go off, then you end up feeling disappointed as the damage doesn't go off at all. You accidentally throw an attack too many and you have no more spells to cast on your attack that crit it. So how do you remedy this problem? You just have to drop the cooldown of such spells with cooldown recovery rate items. It is kind of weird how this is worded since what recovery rate means is that the cooldown is recovering more often. Essentially, in layman terms, a cooldown reduction. How I personally learned the finer details of cast on crit builds was from an extensive guide written by a dude named Kami on this topic, so check it out. I will leave a link to this guide in the video description. His post was how I learned the major problems this build has. If I'm pumping too many attacks too fast, then that means your spells won't be casted as often, right? You're pretty much wasting attacks per second. But what if I'm attacking too slow with a ton of cooldown reduction? Then that means your cooldown reduction items are being wasted too. A balance must be found. I'm just going to personally follow his guide that shows the cooldown reduction you need for a certain amount of attacks per second. Okay, so going down the list here on the guide, I already have it opened up, but this is what you want to specifically look for, which is how the build works, attacks per second and cooldown reduction. He explains it right here. This is the meat and potatoes pretty much, which is what he's explaining is that there is 3 different points at which you end up actually having a balance between your cooldown reduction and your attacks per second. What he ends up mentioning here is that you have the 0 to 13% cooldown reduction. I mean, you literally get that just from the craft itself on your belt. And you can have this amount while your attack speed is 6.06 or lower. What this means is that all of these attacks per second that you're doing are not being wasted while having this amount of cooldown reduction. Then you have the second stage at which you actually can go to, which is what you will end up getting just from getting 2 pieces of cooldown reduction. 14 to 51% cooldown reduction that is given from 2 pieces. You require to be less than 7.57, but above 6.06 attacks per second. So that's what that means. So that none of these attacks per second are being wasted or the cooldown reduction at all whatsoever. Now, this cooldown reduction, I believe that why the reason even this is at this amount, it doesn't go higher than this, is because literally this is the highest amount you can maybe even get in the first place. Maybe you can now get a little bit more with awakened orbs. Sorry, not awakened orbs, maven orbs. But I'm not entirely sure what the attacks per second would be at that point. But if you happen to get 52% to 57%, then your attacks have to be in between 7.58 and 10.1 attacks per second. Again, what this mostly means is that these balances and checks are made so that none of your attacks are being wasted, and every single time you attack, a spell is being flown off. For the last thing I need to point out, let's get into the actual gems and support gems you need for this build. The main 6 link will be an Ice Nova accompanied with Cyclone as the catalyst to cast it, a cast on critical strike support to actually cast the Ice Nova, an inspiration support that gives us a charge every time we spend mana up to 5 charges. Each of these charges, known as inspiration charges, gives us 5% more elemental damage and 8% increased critical strike chance. Since we are barely spending mana with our Cyclone, we never really run into the issue of losing the inspiration charges from spending 800 mana in total. It also makes your Ice Nova and Cyclone cost less mana. A Hypothermia, which gives us up to 29% more damage against chilled enemies, and also a plus 20% chance to freeze enemies as a defensive layer. I mean, if they're frozen, they can't hit, right? The last link I get is increased critical strike supports. Once you hit around 68 to 75% crit strike chance on Cyclone, the Ascendancy Ambush and Assassinates from Assassin covers the remaining critical strike chance you need in order to make sure that the first hit you get on a monster is a crit. If your crit is already too high, then this gem can be dropped for something that could give you more damage. Either a power charge on critical support for more damage per power charge, or an increased critical damage support would work too. On one of the cosplays, I slot in a Frostbolt, an Ice Nova, and an Onslaught for increased attack speed. It tends to proc a lot more often than it would seem by being on your cosplays. I'm talking about the Onslaught. Keep in mind, in order to make the Frostbolt worthwhile, you want to equip a Frozen Trail, since this will throw 3 Frostbolts rather than 1, giving you a lot more Ice Nova explosions since these two work in tandem. On the other cosplays, you put on the 3rd Ice Nova with a Frost Bomb and Life Leech. You can swap out the Frost Bomb for a Hydrosphere if you like. Every single time the cosplayer activates your spells, the Hydrosphere will follow you around with no major problem. The Life Leech is just there for some survivability. I personally still use a level 1 cast when damage taken support linked with a level 3 Immortal Call, since I don't really have any endurance charges half the time. In fact, I usually don't even get them. If I had some endurance charges though, then I would swap this out for a Steel Skin. You would then leave the Steel Skin at level 10 so it can be activated by the cast when damage taken. For movement skills, this one is entirely based on your taste. I still use Flame Dash and Smoke Mine, but Smoke Mine feels god awful now with the changes they did to it. I'm already considering switching instead to Whirling Blades and Flame Dash to get over ledges. And last but not least, your auras. These would be Precision, Hatred, and Herald of Ice, and a Clarity left at level 1. This leaves us with just barely enough mana to cast everything comfortably. And Enlighten, linked to the first 3 auras I mentioned, does wonders here too, so good luck getting one at level 4. Well, that is it for the guide to get your COC to work again. If you have any further questions, just go ahead and put them in the YouTube comments, I guess. I probably missed a thing or two. If you have any more immediate questions, you can go check me out on twitch.tv/Selva_Peluda. And yeah, that's about it. But now that I got most of the uniques and cooldown recovery rare bits, how about we go get revenge on some charging chickens?
Mission failed. We'll get them next time.